Hey folks, Josh Scanlon with Heritage Wealth Planning here again. Last video we talked about how debt can ruin you financially. In this video we're going to talk about how leverage can ruin you financially as well. This is the second part of the first chapter of my strategic money planning book, 8 Ways to Get Your Financial House in Order. Debt is the Enemy is the name of the first chapter, and it's broken down into kind of 2 case studies. The first one, the last video we talked about with Brenda and Kevin, how when Brenda took a pretty significant pay cut and how it really set them back financially to the point where they might not be able to recoup. The second part of this, of course, is leverage. Now, you may not remember, but in 2004 and 5 and 6, banks were loaning money to anybody. There's literally something called ninja loans. No income, no assets or job. No income, no assets or job. Ninja loans. And essentially anyone who could breathe, if you could fog a mirror, you get a mortgage. It was crazy. The reasoning behind that was if I buy a house for $100,000, it's probably going to be worth $115,000 next year, $135,000 the year after, and so on and so on. So if I buy a house for $100,000, I put $5,000 down, I sell it in a couple years for $135,000, I've taken my $5,000 of equity and I've increased that to $40,000 after the sale and all. It's just it's a long way to say I borrowed to buy an asset, the asset increased in value, and the increase in value all goes to me. In this case, going back to the last YouTube channel video, the debt was fixed, but my assets are variable. And back then, the assets did a one way only, to the northeast. They just kept going up and up and up. So if my debt is fixed here, and my assets go up, my assets have this gap, this significantly growing delta, the difference between my debt and my asset base. The difference is all money going back to me. And that's how leverage can work when it works well. And in the early 2000s, it was working well for many people, to the point where people are saying, why would I put anything down when I can put as little amount as I need down to get this asset, a house, sell it in a year or two for a significantly higher price than what I bought it for, and get all my money back, plus the equity I built up because the asset increase. Guess what happens when that doesn't work? Sad, but let me show you here. So now I'm going to show you a quick little spreadsheet I created. Nothing fancy, but it's so important for you to understand leverage, because I tell you, leverage has made a lot of people wealthy, don't get me wrong, but it's made a whole lot more people broke. And that's exactly what caused the Great Depression, by the way. Yes, trade tariffs did. Yes, FDR has some laws in there that really, we're going to plow over cornfields when people are starving. Anyway, at the end of the day, one of the things that you read about the Great Depression was bankers jumping off buildings because the markets went down. Well, the reason they did that is because they were leveraged. They borrowed. Leverage is synonymous with borrowing. They were leveraged to the hilt. And when the asset declined as opposed to inclining, they had more debt than they could pay. And the only way to, what they thought to be solvent was to jump off a building. Sad. So here's how it's supposed to work. Let's just say in 2015, you bought a house for $200,000. So you paid $200,000 for a house. You put $10,000 in. That's your down payment. That's your equity. So $200,000 house, you put $10,000 in, and the house, the amount of money that you owe on that home is $190,000. It makes sense. Your debt to equity ratio is 5%. Actually, let me change this. It's actually equity to debt. Equity to debt. To debt ratio. Because you have 5% equity relative to the debt that you have. And again, equity divided into debt is your equity to debt ratio, and here's 5%. Now, we have a 4% increase in the value of the home year over year. So for 2015, 16, 17, and 18, the real estate value of the asset went up by 4% a year. And so at the end of 2018, end of the 4 years, the house is worth $234,000. It increased in value by $34,000. You were paying mortgage and you paid down the debt by only $10,000, but now you only owe $180,000 on it. But our equity has gone up from $10,000 to $54,000. You quintupled the equity that you had, even though you only paid $10,000 down in debt. The reason for that is because we had a $34,000 increase in equity simply due to the appreciation of the asset. I can't stress this enough. When leverage works, and when it works always on paper. In reality, it doesn't work nearly as much, but it does work. I'm telling you, it can. In this case, it worked like a charm. You put $10,000 down, you paid $10,000 of your mortgage balance, and the rest was driven by the increase in asset value only by 4%. We're not talking about a huge amount of increase in asset price increase. And now we have $54,000 in equity on a house that we only owe $180,000 on. So our equity to debt ratio now is 23%. Again, a quintupling of our equity ratio, even though we've only paid $10,000 less in debt, paid down our debt by $10,000. The amazing, and Albert Einstein, the compounding interest, it's genius. It's amazing how it works. So let's fast forward another 4 years, 2018, 19, 20, and 21. Another 4 years at 4% increase in asset value. Again, 4% isn't crazy man talk. Now the house is worth $273,000. You've paid another $11,000 against your debt. So you've reduced your debt by another $11,000. So now you only owe $169,000. To take this, subtract by that, and this is your equity. You own $105,000 of this house. $105,000 is yours. You can't take it to the bank, mind you. You got to be able to cash out before you can take it to the bank. But this is the value that is yours relative to what the house is worth. You still owe $169,000. So your debt hasn't dropped that much. It's just your equity has jumped significantly over those years. And now your equity to debt ratio is a very favorable 38.6%. Was that 38.26%? So you own more than a third of the entirety of the value of the house. Here you owned 5% of the entirety of the value of the house, and you owed 95% of the value of the house. Here you own 38% of the value of the house, and you owe 62%. So you can see how the leverage works as magic. When the market goes up, when the assets increase, leverage can work like a charm, which I just said. What happened in 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009? Let me give you a story with you. We bought our first house in Phoenix, Arizona in 1998 for $97,000. Yeah, 97,000. It was less than 100. We sold it for $123 in 2001. So it appreciated by roughly 20% or so over those 3 years. Not too shabby. A few years later, I think in 2006, the lady who bought it from us sold it for $242,000. We went out for a family vacation in 2011, I think. Drove by the house. In fact, it's interesting. The palm trees I planted had just they were looking marvelous. It was fantastic. Those things that just bloom, huge trees out there, provide a lot of shade for that home, which in Phoenix you need because it's just such a dry climate. There's not that many trees that provide you shade like we have here in Georgia. The house was for sale for $75,000. We bought it in 1998 for less than 100. We sold it for 123 or something like that. The lady who bought it from us sold it for 240, and over the next 5 years it dropped to 75,000 or something like 80,000. It was less than what we initially bought it, basically 15 to 20 years previously. Now remember, we drove by and the door was open. and I could tell it was unoccupied. And I went in there, and it was actually an orthodontist, the dentist, the doctor, dentist, orthodontist, orthopedist, whatever they're called. But, a pretty wealthy guy. And he was basically cleaning it out. And I said, what's going on here? He goes, oh, man, the previous owners just walked away. They took out all the utility appliances, basically took the copper wiring and everything. And basically they took the whole thing. They took it away. They left with all that, and they left me holding a wet bag. Or the previous owner was that guy. They left the bank holding a wet bag. And so this dentist swooped in and said, I'll pay cash money. I think he paid like $60,000 for it or something like that. And his thing is he was buying this whole just rental empire or real estate empire of houses down the block, because it wasn't just our old house. His house is for as far as you can see. In Phoenix, they do these cookie cutter things, or just one after another on an eighth of an acre, which is 6,000 square feet or something like that. And they're just putting them in. So if one house is going kaput, the other houses will fall along. It's almost like a condo unit, actually. They're all the same. And so this guy was buying up all these houses, cash money, but he's paying cash for them. And the bank was just trying to get it off. They're just taking it right off. They just didn't want anything to do with it. So this guy was going in there, and I was talking to him. And again, I think he said he had like 6 or 7 on that block alone. A lot of them were fine. This one, ours, was occupied by guys who took the appliances and took the copper wiring and all that, copper wiring. But he's able to go in there for $65,000, $70,000. He was going to fix them up. This is literally how you're supposed to do flipping. So his equity was a 65 or 70. He was going to turn around and flip them. For he's thinking he'd get 140 for him. And I think he did. I looked on Realtor or Zillow, one of those websites, a few years ago, and they were selling for 140, 150. And so that's how you flip. But the issue between him was he wasn't leveraging much. He was paying cash money for it, knowing that the property value was at a low, very, very low there, and there wasn't a lot of building going on in Phoenix. So he knew that the supply of available housing was going to be minimal, and that someone was going to pay a much higher price than what he paid to get in that home once the economy leveled off. And he was right. It was a wonderful move for his real estate empire, but it didn't involve leveraging. It didn't involve leveraging where you're only borrowing or putting 5% down and you're borrowing 95%. That's not what he did. He bought it all cash money. He probably had a little bit of debt. I imagine a little bit. I don't know. But he did the reverse of leveraging. He paid it all equity, and that way he wasn't, his cash was in the house, and if the house didn't sell, he'd be without that cash. But he wasn't borrowing on the idea that the leveraging will make him a millionaire. It just wasn't doing that. Because what happens if the leverage doesn't work out? Well, here is a case where the 4% was a decrease in the value of the home each and every year, not an increase. And so each year the house goes down by 4% in fair market value. So let's just go back to 2015. You buy this guy for $200,000. You only put $10,000 down. That should be 5% equity to debt. 10% on a $190,000 house means your debt to equity is 5%. Or your equity to debt is 5%. Again, you own 5%. You owe 95% of the house. The idea is that the increasing in asset value will give you more equity than what you put in. But unfortunately, after 4 years, fair market value of that house is only $170,000. The house is depreciated by $30,000. Yeah, you were able to knock your debt down by 10, but the value of your home is less than you owe, which means you have negative equity of $10,000. That means your equity to debt ratio is a negative 5.5%. You owe more than it's worth, negative equity. Fast forward 4 more years, the house continued to drop by 4%. Again, guys, I'm not saying this is likely to happen. I don't know, but this is what can happen when leverage works against you. Again, we're not talking significant increase or decrease in property values, but a 4% per year decrease. Now your house is only worth $144,000. Again, you're able to pay down some of the debt, but you still owe $169,000. Take $169,000, subtract by $144,000, and you owe $25,000 more than this puppy's worth, which means you have a negative equity ratio of 15%, 14.79 to be exact. You owe almost 15% more than it's worth. And if you're going to sell this guy and you throw closing costs and mortgage commissions in there, real estate commissions, it's going to be worse. That's leverage. That's how good it can work. That's how bad it can work. Don't be suckered into the idea that real estate or stocks or, Bitcoin, for everything that goes up, it can certainly go down. Now, the issue between the difference here is if you have the time to wait for the market to re-energize itself, you can be fine. But a lot of people who take the leverage do it with the full intention of selling it in the first year or two. And that's when it can really bite in the bud, because those could have significant declines in value. If you can hang in there, you'll be fine. If you could be like my dentist and have lots of equity built up there and you don't need to sell it for a fire sale, you'll be fine because you have lots of equity. But if you're riding on the hope that the equity will increase because of asset appreciation, hope is not a good financial planning strategy. Hope may or may not come to fruition, but financial planning is not about that. Financial planning is about more than hope. Financial planning is about the what-if scenarios that come and bite you in the bud, and leverage is one of those ones. Not saying you don't borrow to buy a house. I'm in this house right here in Georgia, and I'm telling you, we owe more than we own. I'm telling you that right now, but we put 20% down, and that is a good feeling because if the real estate market tanks and we have to sell, it's a pretty doggone good chance that we'll have equity in there to at least coverage the mortgage or the real estate closing cost. And that way we can walk away without having to go to the bank to try to borrow another $25,000 just to get out from underneath a negative equity house. Don't want that to be you. So be careful when it comes to leverage. Be careful. All right. Again, what I always ask, love your comments and comments that you have. Share with them, please. Have you ever used leverage? Did it work? Did it hurt? I'd love to hear cases where it worked well for you, where it didn't work well. If you have some thoughts to share with the other folks that are watching, by all means do so. Say, hey man, this worked for us real well. This didn't work so well. Be careful here, or you might want to think about that. Lastly, just to hit me in the head. If you're going to leverage, you don't leverage on an asset that's going to depreciate. So a car. You never leverage a car because a car is assured to lose value the minute you drive it off the lot. You want to leverage on things that appreciate so you can take advantage of the debt leveraging concept. I actually don't recommend doing it because I don't think it works as well as it seems like it could on paper. But if you're going to, make sure you're doing it with something that's going to increase in value as opposed to something that's going to flatline or decrease in value. All right, don't forget to subscribe down there. That red button, subscribe, just means you're signed up. Hit the bell for notifications. That means you get notified when I produce new content. I got 7 more chapters left on this book to talk about. So I'm going to be doing those each and every day. And then we'll go on to my next book, 21 Reasons Why You Need a Roth IRA. So stick with me. More content to come. And I appreciate your patience and hanging in there with me. Thanks, guys.